problem of evil is a big problem. And to break evil down into its component parts can give us a greater ability to understand it. And in understanding evil and how evil works, it gives us a greater ability to resist it and oppose it. So today I want to talk about evil and make a distinction between personal, individual evil and systemic evil. Personal, individual evil is how we, it manifests in sin. How others sin against us and how we sin against others. However you want to interpret that, however you want to understand it, and work on it in your life. Systemic evil is big. Systemic evil often disguises itself. It often hides itself as righteousness. It's a bit harder, or maybe a lot harder, to get a grasp on systemic evil. So that's what I want to talk about at some depth this morning. I'm going to do it anecdotally, and then philosophically, and then with a little bit of a call to action at the end. Anecdotally, a long time ago, I worked in the Deanery of Eastern Montreal, and as is the case in each deanery, every now and then you have a clericus, it was monthly clericus, and one of the one of the clergy who was at that clericus was an American, became a Canadian citizen after the Second World War. He came to this country, he came to the priesthood as a second career. In fact, he just celebrated a very senior birthday, shall we say. And around Remembrance Day one year, when you're having a clericus, he did something that he very, very rarely did. And that was to speak of his experience in the Second World War, particularly with the D-Day landing. I forget which beach he was at, but he was part of the American contingent. He was not first wave. He was part of the follow-up, and obviously survived the day. He told some stories of the things that he saw and the things that he did. One in particular strikes me and sticks in my memory. He did it in far more graphic detail than I'm going to do it this morning, but do a little editing in your own mind, and you could just imagine if I was to tell this story but in much more graphic detail, imagine what that would be like. He was a rifleman, he was a Marine, so we're talking about a big guy, strong guy, even in his 70s he was big and strong. Now he looks really like a reject from hippie commune, but that's okay. Big, strong man, and I could just imagine him in his youth, in his very early 20s, what he would have looked like in a Marine uniform and with his rifle. Well, on this particular occasion, after the beachhead was secure, they began the inland march. Ultimately, of course, heading towards the pincer movement, which eventually took Germany. And he talks about going down the roads and how each town and village had to be cleared out, and how the artillery would go first, and you try to do as much as you can to the enemy with the artillery, and then you follow up, and then with tanks and stuff like that, and then you follow up with the infantry. Well, as one of the infantry, a rifleman, it was his job to root out whatever resistance, whatever German resistance remained. And he spoke of this one particular day in one particular village in France where they were having a big problem. There was a machine gun nest in the steeple of a church in the village. It was causing a great deal of problems and slowing down the advance. And so he did something that he hadn't done before. He took a bazooka and loaded it. Well, it was loaded for him. Aimed it at the steeple and fired at that machine gun nest. There's a term in the military. It's a euphemism. It's called silence the enemy. It doesn't mean just sort of go shush. He silenced the enemy. And he described in great detail what he saw as that projectile left the bazooka. Never having seen a bazooka around in real life, only on movies, I can only imagine this, but apparently you can see the smoke trail of the rocket engine, and you can follow it to its destination. And it's a matter of seconds. It's not instantaneous. In war movies, and when you watch somebody being shot on Netflix, pull the trigger and the person's down. Bullets and shells and artillery and everything takes time to travel. And he could see the travel of this knowing that as soon as it hit its target, assuming that it did hit its target, that the people who were there would be utterly destroyed. And he described to me, well, to us in detail, the impact point and what resulted from that impact point, from a structural as well as from, let's say, shall we say, a very human, mortal perspective. Described it in good detail. It shocked me and left me feeling in my stomach in a way that I had rarely felt before. As I advanced in my years in ministry, I began to hear more stories from people. And it seemed to me that there were two categories of storytellers, both telling their war stories with integrity and with sincerity, but in very different ways. There were those who talked about the fellowship in crisis often, but the support and the camaraderie and even though it was in a terrible, terrible thing, the terrible, terrible would be brushed off and repressed. The camaraderie and the fellowship would be emphasized. There was that. And then there were those who even half a century, well, almost half a century after the war, would still be struggling to understand and make sense of what humanity can do to humanity. One of these was a person arriving in Massachusetts. His name was Ernie Matthews. Lovely, lovely man. He and his wife, Tardy, immigrated to Canada after the Second World War. They were wonderful, supportive people. And there's lovely stories I can tell you about both of them. During my time in Massachusetts, both of them passed away. Ernie, towards the end of his life, at the end of his days, was pretty much bedridden, but his mind was sharp as a tack. And he had a smile on him that would light up the world. He was an amazing man. And he talked about how he had lost his faith in God during the Second World War because of, I think it was his eyes. He was not allowed to join the army in England. He was on civil defense. And on civil defense, particularly during the Blitz, the bombs fall and you're out there rescuing people, pulling bodies out of the rubble, trying to put out fires. And he talked about this particular time when a building had been leveled and he was on duty, and there was a civil defense, and he saw a hand. And so he tried to get some bricks out of the way and pull the person out. Well, all that came out was the arm of a child. And that's when he said he lost his faith in God. How could a God who loves people, or who is a God of love, allow this to happen? He struggled with that for many, many years. And by the time I knew him, certainly by the time of this conversation with him, he had reconciled himself to a God who is perfectly loving, but also because he is perfectly loving, is also self-limiting. God could intervene, but he self-limits. That's another sermon. And he said, Lord, the problem isn't just with Hitler. The problem, right here. And he pointed out that the problem is in every human heart. In every human heart. That means in each one of you and in each one of me. Each one of me. Sorry, I did not mean that. And in me too. The problem is the human heart. The human heart is capable of incredible good, acts of selflessness and generosity. It's also incredibly capable of horror, small and big. Again, in the parish I served in Montreal North, there was a couple there. They were lovely people. He didn't attend church really. Occasional special things and weddings and stuff like that. Typical guy. But his wife was a regular attender. And as I say, they're both lovely people. In fact, she taught me how to make stained glass windows, which we ended up with a couple of them in St. Margaret's, Massachusetts. And they lived in Blvd, in a very, very nice house in Blvd. And since it was in Montreal North is a bigger city, and people, when they manage to escape Montreal North, they don't tend to go back. They tend to join the West Island Church. But some come back, and when people decide they want to come back, there's always a story. And so I wanted to hear the story. So eventually I got invited over to their house for supper. And you have your usual pleasantries and your introduction over wine and appetizers and all the rest of that. And as I say, lovely people, very, very comfortable environment. And then, of course, the topic goes around to the church. That's always the first thing, because that's how they know and stuff. So they ask about the church, so we have that conversation. And they ask about life and interests. And then, of course, at some point in the conversation, it turns around to, what do you do? To the guy. And I had never heard this answer to that question before. And he seemed a little, but only a little hesitant to say what he did. He says, well, I work for a company that manufactures armament. And I went, oh, it's kind of hard, basically I make weapons. And it's kind of hard when somebody says that to you, what's the appropriate response? Got any samples? Bit glib? How do you respond? Anyone know? I'm going to edit the next part of the sermon. But if you ask somebody, what do you do? And they come up with something that is very strange or out there or inappropriate or illegal, how do you react? Can I just pour wine, please? What do you do? This guy, and then he proceeded to talk about his company. Now I want to really, really make this point very strong because I want no misunderstanding. He was not doing anything illegal at all. He was a company, Canadian. I can't tell you whether the head office was Canadian, but it certainly was in Canada. Totally legal. Totally above board, completely above board. Everything was sold, and he actually made a point of saying this to me. They have end user certificates for all their shipments. And then so he started talking about more details of what he does. And one of the things that he was particularly responsible for was landmines. Now this is before Princess Diana made the world aware of what landmines were capable of, before it became so much in the public consciousness, before there was anything about banning landmines, because as you know, or you should know, multitudes more civilians are killed by leftover landmines than any military application. But that is a thing. His company makes landmines, or made landmines. I don't know if he still works for them. I've talked to him well over 2 decades, more than that. But he was particularly responsible for marketing, not other things. But he specialized, I guess, in landmines. And he was very proud that they had solved a problem with some types of landmines. You see, there's a dispersal problem. One of the particular types of landmines that he had in a plastic case, and it's got little things like little ball bearings. Of course, quite ball bearings, but little ball bearings. And when the landmine is tripped, they get shot out like a shower. They have a problem because the way these things are manufactured, it was like 2 pieces of paper, like one piece of paper with like fly paper, and the ball bearings would be put on the fly paper, and then another piece, of course, by machine, would be laminated on top. And then this would go into the landmine, and the cover would be put on, so that when the explosive is tripped, which is behind the ball bearings, it shoots out, and all these over 700 ball bearings just get sprayed out. Problem is, it was particularly in warm environments, the glue would get soft, and the ball bearings would sag. So the ball bearings didn't have the right dispersal pattern. Well, they had discovered that if instead of using paper with an adhesive, you used a film of epoxy, and then put the ball bearings on that, and another film of epoxy, and then closed it on, you eliminated that problem, so you got the right dispersal pattern. So instead of the ball bearings just taking people off the knees, basically you get one person. And I'm sitting there in the western Montreal suburbs, listening to this. Well, this is his life. This is what he does, and he's speaking about his job, much like a doctor would speak about his doctoring, or a dentist is dentisting, or a teacher they're teachering. It was just speaking of this, and I got to tell you, I didn't know how to react. I didn't know how to react. Basically, this is a person. He's a nice person. Hey, pool table and the basement, how bad can it be? And I'm hearing about this manufacturing of these weapons that destroy people. Preaching this and saying this, I feel very ineffective right now. because there's no drama in it. There's no drama in it. I was actually considering at one point, but I would have been doing it just for shock effect, so I didn't, of getting a couple of YouTube videos of landmines going on, just showing you what landmines do. Because there's actually videos that you can find on the internet, not of, well, I haven't seen any, I certainly wouldn't anyway, of landmines killing real people. But you can see landmines going off against targets, like fake targets, and you can see the destruction. And they've analyzed what damage was done if that had been a human being. So I was thinking of doing that, but I figured that would be shocking. My point in saying all this, and saying all this today, we're going to get to that, is here are some very ordinary people, very lovely people, who provide a nice suburb, who now have two almost grown children, living in a home like any one of us would live in, more expensive than some, less expensive than others. And you could just go over to the house and drop in and have a game of pool, or sit around on the deck on a nice summer night. While over there, the product of this person's employment is destroying lives, and continues to, even after any civil or international wars are well over. And it does raise the question of how we, as a society, tolerate systemic evil. Now, I started off this morning as you were coming in, saying a special anniversary this week. And what is it? And in case any of you came late, the anniversary this week is the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, which led to the start of the First World War, the war to end all wars. There is only one condition under which the First World War would be deemed a war to end all wars, and that is this. If at the end of the First World War, every human being on the planet had taken responsibility for the sin in their own heart and the evil that they were capable of, and repented of it, been absolved of it, and cleansed from the possibility of doing evil. The war to end all wars is a well-intentioned statement, but I don't know whether it was naive or what. It's just after a thing like the First World War, you gotta say, gee, we don't want to do this again. But look at what happened, look at what happens, and look at what continues to go on even today. Now we've got the new thing going on in Iraq. You know, isn't that great? The new thing going on in Iraq. So let's look at that whole environment. After a certain period of historic time, arbitrary lines were drawn on a map. These are now the new countries. Is it any wonder that there are still tribal, clan, and other conflicts still going on? But they're not going on with bows and arrows and spears and knives. They're going on with tanks and airplanes and some incredibly deadly weapons. And it's not because these weapons are made. The weapons are made because of the problem inside the human heart. As long as we tolerate systemic evil will continue. As long as we tolerate landmines as a weapon of war, landmines will continue to be used as a weapon of war. As long as we tolerate chemical weapons, there's still chemical weapon research going on. As long as we tolerate chemical weapons will continue to be used. And you could hang Saddam Hussein. You can get rid of Chemical Ali. But as long as the world is willing to tolerate this stuff and to say it is not our problem, or it's over there, or they created this mess, let them fix it up. As long as we are willing to have those attitudes, we are both reflecting the evil in our own heart and allowing evil to continue. Contrast that with the gospel message. Do you remember last week's gospel? Today's gospel is a good one for preaching on, but I really wanted to do this instead. Last week's gospel was, go out, folks. You who have received the Son of God in your hearts. You who have been empowered by the Holy Spirit of God. You who were empowered with the Spirit to pronounce God's grace and God's judgment. You who were anointed with the power of God. to transform the planet, go out. Get out of your comfortable place, is the philosophy. Get out of your comfortable place. Get out of your living room. Turn off the radio. Turn off the TV. Get out there. You know, I'm sort of culturalizing Jesus. Go into the world and proclaim the gospel of salvation to everybody. I forget who it was, and I tried to find out this week, but I didn't do research in time, and I couldn't look it up on that. Somebody said, maybe it was Mother Teresa, but maybe not. If one of you knows this, please shout it out. Go out into the world and preach the gospel, and if absolutely necessary, use words. I love that. Huh? Was it Francis? That was what was in my brain. I thought that was all right.
Well, you got told me.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so I forgot. There's never any problems. Okay, there's truth in that. You know, you and I are never going to run the United Nations. None of us are ever going to be the Prime Minister of this country or the President of the country south of us. We don't have that power. We will never have that power. But we have the power and the authority. I should have said authority first. The authority to pronounce judgment, the power of God's Spirit conferred on the day of Pentecost. We have the authority and the power to transform the environments around us. First, the immediate environments. Then, secondly, a little spread out from beyond our front door. We have the power to transform the communities we live in. We have the power when we read and hear Jesus say, go out into the world and proclaim the gospel to everybody, baptizing people, in other words, bringing them into the fold, baptizing people everywhere in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I'm with you, even until the close of the age. We have the authority and the power to do that in fulfillment of that commandment, which is the acting out of the great commandment that Jesus gave. Remember that one? A new commandment I give to you. Love each other in the same way that I loved you. Love each other the same way that I loved you. And what way did Jesus love us? Sacrificially until the job is completed. Isn't that neat? I've never used that phrase in a sermon before. When it says Jesus did what he completed his job. How did he do that? He gave his life sacrificially. He kept giving until his job was completed. And as we go out and live the gospel and share it and spread it, that is what we are called to do. To live our lives sacrificially until the job is completed. Will we go over to Cambodia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, all over the place, digging up landmines? No, we're not going to do that. Chances are we're not going to do that. Might we write a letter to the government suggesting that maybe, being involved in this type of weapons manufacture is not something Canada wants to be known for? Yeah, we could do that. I was at a conference once led by Reed Scowen, former MLA in Quebec, and he said, now I forget the number. Murray, you'll remind us. For every letter the government gets from an individual, they assume it represents the thinking of either 300 or 600 people, I forget. And it has that amount of weight. If there's something going on in your municipality that you don't like, or something that you think should go on, right? Make a phone call. Your opinion counts because they know that statistically, if you think that way, there are 300 or 600 other people who think exactly the same way, but aren't taking the time to correspond with them. So let's see. I counted before. There was 28 adults in church this morning. So 28 times 3. Just figure it out. Now, if all 28 were to send a letter about something that concerns us to the municipality, maybe it'll be about the need for another palliative care facility because we don't have enough. Maybe it'll be a need for subsidized senior housing because God knows we're short 50,000 spaces. Maybe it would be something to do with the education system. Who knows? But if we were to do that, it counts in thousands. It counts as if it represents the voice of thousands. We can't, get landmines off the face of the earth. We can't guarantee that there won't be another war, especially a war to end all wars, because that's just Pollyanna. But what we can do is we can change our immediate environment. So the call to action this morning is this. Find a cause. Find something that makes you passionate. Hey, if it's landmines, that's great. If it's senior care, that's great. If it's youth and resources for youth, that's fantastic. If it's family life education and development, that's wonderful. If it's our schools, that's magnificent. I could go on and on and on. Find something that gets your heart pumping. It gets the oxygenated cells really moving. It gets your brain cranking. Find a cause. And not just because it makes you feel good, but pursuing causes does make you feel good. There's nothing wrong with that. I happen to think that when Jesus did some of his miracles, he got a charge from it. I really do. I think that. I think Jesus was probably there going, that's pretty cool. There's nothing wrong with feeling good about doing good. But understand that what we're battling is not just the wishy-washiness of humanity. It's not just, sometimes nice people do not nice things. There is systemic evil in our world. And it is in our heart as well. Well, it's systemic. And it is systemic because of the evil in the individual hearts. And I would like to suggest to you in closing that one of the greatest evils that we commit is to do nothing in the face of the wrongs in our society. So find something that turns you on. Find something that animates you. Find something that motivates you and challenges you. Get on board, take it on, and change the world. Now, I'm going to finish with a tribute to one of our parishioners, Pat Roberts. She will never be nominated for formal canonization, though I think she should. She deserves more than some of them did. Pat Roberts got this passion in her for children, particularly with intellectual developmental challenges, Down syndrome, all of them. And when she first started out, people thought she was nuts. She felt that there should be resources and special education and schooling for these children in a time when there was no such thing on the West Island. And do you know how Pat Roberts began a crusade? Did any of you know the first thing that she did to begin her crusade? If I say Doorbell Shopping Center, does that say anything to anybody? Pat Roberts and a couple of friends baked some cakes and sold them for 50 cents a slice at Doorbell Shopping Center to raise money to fund special education for children with intellectual difficulties. And as a result of that, ultimately that led to Shout at the School. You should all know it. She's one of ours. John F. Kennedy School, that's right. That school came to exist because of Pat Roberts and what she was able to do. The power of one. And as time went on and she got older, she took a backstage, but people caught the vision. And now what she, and others of course, started, we could not even consider not having in our school system. Help for people with special needs. Can you imagine there was a time when there were no programs for kids with special needs and learning disabilities? Can you imagine that? Well, I can't because I grew up in that time. All this has happened since I was in elementary and high school. Okay? So, the power of one to change. Find a cause, take it on, and in the name of God, act on it. And if you don't change the whole world, at least you'll change your part of it. Now let's pray. God, we thank you for saints through the ages that have made a difference. And here I use the word saint in the biblical sense. And those called by God to be part of this fellowship. We thank you for people who have mentored us and been examples of your grace to us. As well for people who've shocked us into the realization of our responsibility. Lord, help us to find and to deal with the darkness in our own hearts and lives, wherever it comes from, however it got there. Shatter our complacency and replace it with a passion for justice. We thank you that even in this day, where there are wars, there are countless people working for the common good. Social care workers, health education, doctors, nurses, people who lay down the line for the sake of the common good. And we pray for your church, that in the midst of our concerns about budgets and leaky roofs and all that stuff, we would not forget that our job is to work with you to transform the world. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen.
Amen.